Hello, everyone. We're back. It's Possibilities with Monique DeMeo, and today I am supercharged to have with me one of my dearest friends, wonderful people, person, human on the planet, love her to pieces, Dr. Karen Latimer. Hello, Karen.
Oh, hi, Monique. I'm so happy you're finally doing this.
I
This is
know this is
exciting.
exciting. So Karen was like in the inner circle when I was just uttering the possibility, no pun intended, of doing a podcast and writing a book. And she was like all about it because guess what? She's done it already. So Karen is a very accomplished entrepreneur and app developer. As of right now, we'll talk about your app during the course of the conversation. We'll talk about your years as a physician, your growing up. Today we're unpacking with Karen so many things, and the conversation that we had was reflected in chapter 6 of the book called The Sixth Secret. External narratives, the stories that we tell about ourselves to other people, which is intricately linked to the internal narrative. Say that fast 5 times, which is the story and how we speak to ourselves. So Karen and I have had extensive conversations about how the two are intertwined and how they coexist in somebody, and what that amounts to when you have these micro moments and choice, and what you do with your internal and your external narratives and how that shows up in your life. So they didn't come to hear me blab, they came to hear you. So tell us a little bit about your upbringing, and you talk in the book about how you chose to become a physician, and sort of the context and the upbringing that led you to the Karen of today.
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in, like probably like a lower middle class family in Queens, New York. One of four girls, one bathroom. Imagine the house was full of love, and that there was a lot of discipline, and we were sort of just expected to do what we were meant to do in that moment. And there wasn't a whole lot of talk about what is that going to lead to. There wasn't a whole lot of conversation about, well, work hard and then you can get here. It was more like just work hard so you can get that next report card and get those grades. So I don't know that it was ever communicated to me in any way like, hey, you can do anything you want. You can be anything you want. It was more like, hey, follow the rules. Do what you're supposed to do. And I know from my parents' standpoint, who again were like the most loving parents, this was the way they were raised, right? You're just supposed to do what you're supposed to do. My sister was the first my dad's one of 10, and my sister was the first one to go to college, and was only encouraged to even go away to college because some family friend's child did that. And that was like, whoa, she went away to college. She didn't commute. That was a big deal. So I grew up without, it was a small world, right? Where I think people were telling me, again, do the right thing, but maybe not necessarily dream big. When I was about 5, I was injured at my aunt's house, doesn't matter, ankle, bleeding, needing stitches, get to the hospital, scared little girl. This man comes in and starts checking me out, and my parents immediately start talking to him as if he's the physician. And then he says, oh, no, 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 the doctor's coming in. The doctor comes in, and she's a woman. She's a young woman. And honestly, I think the pain went away. It was like, what is happening? And this was just reinforced for me throughout, the next months, even probably years, that my parents would retell this story as if a unicorn came in to be the doctor. I know, I mean, really, like, and their friends would all be like, wow. And now these are intelligent people. My parents were smart people. They just had no opportunity for higher education or anything like that. So this was sort of mind blowing to them. My dad was a police officer. My mom stayed home. Her thing was, she was either going to become a nun or a housewife. Like those were her choices, even though she was brilliant. Like she was an incredibly smart woman. But those were her choices. So I think it just, got into my DNA early. Not even so much like, oh, hey, I want to help people. And all of that is true. And that has become true for me. I love helping people. But it was more, wow, look how impressive that was to my parents. I want to impress them, right? I want to set myself apart from my sisters. I want to be impressive. Only upon looking back and really identify that moment as the moment that I was like, I'm going to be a doctor, and just kind of went along the path from there.
Isn't that interesting? How the reactions of our family and the dynamics within the family structure can lead you to make a decision that impacts the rest of your life, or how you see life, right? She's an impressive, and what's more impressive about this story is the juxtaposition of the male nurse, which didn't happen a lot either. So I feel like that was like the universe's way of setting it up as a story for you. No, it's not the male doctor and the female nurse. It's the switchy poo.
Right. No, I mean, look at what was it, Meet the Fockers, right? Where he, oh, Greg RN, it was, he was the unicorn in a way, that male nurse.
He was.
And at that time I was 5, so we're going back. That's a long time ago. There weren't a lot of women in medicine.
What did you find as you were going through the actual journey of becoming a physician, which is not an easy one, relative to your male cohorts?
Interesting. The journey to get to medical school was really kind of a easy one for me. And I'll tell you why. Because I was ignorant. Because there was no Google. I didn't have any role models. I had nobody telling me this is a hard thing to do. For me, it was, oh, you're a smart girl. You get good grades. You should be a doctor. I'll just be a doctor. And that's kind of how I went through it. And I went to Manhattan College because they'd given me a scholarship to go there. So for college, before even the application process happened, I met the admissions person, whatever, at a not back to school, like a college night, in high school. And he said, oh, what is, grades, SAT at the time. And he was like, we'll give you a full scholarship. So my mother was like, okay, so that's where you'll go. That's where my sisters went. My sisters both went there. One of them also had a full scholarship. He gave me we couldn't afford it. That was my choice, but they didn't have pre-med, right? So even though I knew I wanted to be a doctor, nobody was even saying, well, then look pre-med, And then I was an engineer because they were known for engineering. And then that was too hard because I really wanted to have a good time. So I did marketing. And I took all of my prerequisite classes just as extras. Like I graduated with like a crazy number of credits, but I did all this with no guidance just because somebody said, oh, these, there was a book or something. These are the prerequisites. So I just took them. And then when it came time, then I took the MCAT. I studied and I took it. And then it came time to apply to medical school. I got into all but Yale. I did not where your daughter it was. But I got into all the schools I applied to. So, and even then, I don't think I felt like that was a big deal. I just didn't know how competitive it was. And no joke, I think, and this is probably something that I say to kids all the time when they're like struggling about what they want to do. I honestly think they got my application. My essay was on being a bartender and how that was like being a doctor, which I stand by. I went to Manhattan College where there was no pre-med. They weren't getting applications from Manhattan College. I was just this sort of like middle school kid with a police officer dad. And I think they were like, let's just interview her. I always think like, who does she think she is? Kind of a thing. I do think, and this speaks to, the point, you want to talk about the narrative we tell ourselves. If I had known it was that difficult, I don't know that I would have done it. Because at the time, I think my fear of failure would have outweighed my desire to go to medical school. And so that's why I say my path was easy because I was ignorant. Because I worked hard, I got the grades, but it never really occurred to me that I wouldn't get into a medical school. Whereas, I remember at the time, and I'm patting myself on the back a little bit, but when I tell you, I had no idea, like 13,000, I remember Georgetown got like 13,000 applications and they took 120 kids.
Good for you. That's amazing.
But I didn't even know. But that's why I did it. I think oftentimes, and this is something I've definitely had to overcome because like the same way I wanted to please my parents, I also didn't want to disappoint them, right? So, that holds us back as well, right? It can be a driving force, but it can be this thing that really holds us back when there's somebody that we want to impress or somebody that we want to please, because I see it a lot with my own children. Sometimes I'll say, you're afraid to try and fail, so you're not trying at all. And I think that would have been me had I known there was a very strong possibility I was not going to get into medical school after all that trying. But I didn't know.
You didn't know, so you didn't care to fear it. So you don't fear it. It can't hold you back. So the narrative of I may not succeed wasn't even in your consciousness. First, I do want to hear, how are doctors and bartenders the same?
Oh, they both make you feel better by giving you things. I would love to reread this essay. I'm sure it was I have no idea. It's probably somewhere. But it was a lot of the listening. And I do think that like people come to bartenders sometimes, not when you're out for a good time, but if you're a daytime bartender at a place, and I've been that, and there are people who come and they just need to talk. And they're looking for you to help them, and they're looking for you to sort of concoct something that will take some of the pain away. And those two things are pretty much what a good doctor does, right? They listen, They offer some advice. And if there's a way to take away some of the pain, they find a way to do it.
Wow. So that's a brilliant analogy. And I think you were doing what people pay hundreds and hundreds of dollars an hour for their college coaches to do. You were just authentic. You were a little different. You didn't fear you didn't fear what you didn't know.
Yeah, I didn't fear the rejection, so I didn't.
Didn't color it.
Yeah, I didn't let that kind of get in the way. It probably just kept me like, it's a great point. I never really thought about it that way, but it probably just kept me authentic, which resonates with people. Authenticity resonates always. I know the college process, having been through it with a couple of kids, like it's insane, and that's a whole nother element. But I would just say, like, in life, authenticity resonates. And we've lost a lot of that with social media because we become so used to trying to market ourselves. And in some way, to the point of this podcast, you need to market yourself, right? But you can do so by highlighting the things that are true about you, as opposed to, the good and the bad, really.
Yeah. I used your compare and despair culture note, and I give you credit every time I do it. And I love it. Tell me more about how you think that our children of this generation are not afforded the ability to do what you did completely by accident because you didn't know any better.
In every way, right? In every single way, they can't do it. In friendships, they can't do it. In job searches, they can't do it. Couple keywords into a Google, you have a 16-year-old girl who wants to be a doctor now, who, living in Queens and doesn't have any role models. She Googles and she sees, I don't know what the 1% acceptance rate. She's going to say, like, fuck it, I'm not going to do it. And on top of that, add and I'm dwelling on this a little bit, but I think it's important, add the feeling of, like, everyone's going to know if you failed, right? So you don't want to try and fail because your failures aren't even, like, personal anymore. Your failures become this thing that everybody knew about. Everyone knew she wanted to go to medical school. And, parents, we talk about our kids. We know more about other people's kids than people ever did before. I mean, did your parents know what your friends were doing? But there's a freedom in that, there's a prison in what our kids have, right? This kind of just maybe more like a fishbowl. And how are they going to get beyond those walls, right? If everyone's just, like, staring at them all the time. And
so what is it? So we've also talked about, speaking to yourself, and it's the name of one of my secrets chapters is speaking to yourself like a BFF. And I know that's a very big theme for you. And, in case anybody doesn't know this, Dr. Latimer has 5 children. Yes, I did say 5. She started a blog called Yes 5. I remember that blog. That was great, right? Tell us about that and how that permeates some of your parenting. And then we can also talk about, which I put in the book, by the way, as a resource, is your audio book of Taking Back the House, which is one of my favorite books ever.
Thank you. You're the best. I have another one coming out in September, actually. But I don't know that it came through in my parenting early on as much as I would just say, you need to be nicer to yourself. You need to be nicer to yourself. It wasn't until I started doing, like, life coaching that I started to really recognize that tool as something so incredibly valuable, right? So you and I are on a coaching call. You're beating yourself up because that's what we do. Women, I'm so stupid. I'm so dumb. I did this. I can't believe I did that. You do this. The guilt-ridden aspect of our entire lives. And I will, like, pause you and just say, okay, hold on. Just listen to me for a second. Pretend we're friends and just listen to me. And then I just repeat those words, whatever it may be, about work failures, not being able to lose weight, or struggling with health problems, parenting is often a big thing. And I just say, and I just rephrase, and I say it right back.
To them as if you're you.
To them as if I'm me. So I would say, so say you were having a problem, let's say with your twins, which you don't have. So I like to bring up hypotheticals that couldn't be possible. So, oh my gosh, I'm feeling like I'm loving one more twin than the other. I'm doing this. And then I just feel so mad at myself. And I think this happened. He's failing in school because I did this. And then I'll just rephrase and I'll say, oh my gosh, like, Monique, I'm feeling so awful. I did this. Like, I created this, whatever. And I say, okay, now go. And inevitably, the person I'm talking to will give me the best advice back and the most kind, empathetic, compassionate advice back. And meanwhile, all I'm doing is saying their words back to them. But it is sometimes, it's easy to say, like, be nicer to yourself, be nicer to yourself. But sometimes when you hear those words said back, so I found it, yes, valuable. I probably use it more in my parenting now than I did now that I see it as like a real tool as opposed to a piece of advice. But the tool there is incredibly useful for people because if nothing else, I get yeah, I get that. Like, I get that. And if you even just take that one moment to be nice to yourself.
Okay, stop right there. That's a masterclass, people. That is a masterclass. That masterclass is the mirroring of what did you just say to yourself, played back to yourself from somebody else's mouth, said to you. That's a masterclass.
Yeah. And the next step needs to be, okay, what would you say to me? We're great friends. Make me feel better. And inevitably, it's always like, why would you think that was your fault? How could that possibly be your fault? All of a sudden, like, what you would say to a friend becomes so obvious, and it's always so kind, and useful and compassionate and all the things that we need to be more to ourselves, which we have to work at, quite frankly. And I think we have to work at it more now than we ever have before.
Well, there's more negativity around us, I think, or at least there may not be more negativity around it, but back to the compare and despair, I assert that we know of it more. So therefore it permeates our existences more so than it used to because ignorance is bliss. And back in the day when you didn't know what your neighbor was doing or what the next country, you had a little bit less visibility into things. So without visibility, you can't get stressed about things you don't know about.
And I mean, I don't know how you feel about this, but I think a lot, this is coming from somebody, you're two women talking who are trying to help people like through writing and through books, right? I try to do that with my Audible. And there's so much information out there that the mistake we make is reading things where we think that there's a one right way to do things. So once you think there's one right way to do things, well, then you can be wrong a lot of the time. And I think that's a big part of it too, especially with parenting, there just seems like, oh, there's a right way to do this. Whereas each situation, each person is just so unique. There's no one right way to do that. But if you believe there is, then it's just so much easier to blame yourself when things don't go right.
Well, 80% of our thoughts are negative. So the human condition is already wired to be more negative than positive. We're wired to see the glass is half empty, or we're wired to figure out. And I'm still working on this. I'm a work in progress. And my husband will say that to me. I say, I'm the happiest I've ever been. I'm so like life is good, joyful, joy is, whatever. All this stuff. Every day is filled with at least one thing that I'm passionate about. And he goes, well, you're not showing up like that. Oh my God, it's leveling. It's leveling. Are you being your best self with me? No, actually, because I'm just focused on that 1%. It's really sad.
Or can it not be sad? Can it be an opportunity?
Oh, it's an opportunity for sure.
Right?
That's true.
It's an opportunity. Just acknowledging it is an opportunity. I think that it really starts with not beating yourself up for having the negative thoughts, but to say, okay, there's my friend. Her husband just got a huge promotion at work. I am happy for them. Like, I'm legitimately happy for them. But maybe there's a part of me that is like, oh, like, I can't believe they got lucky again. Or I can't believe. And then you feel so bad that you had that thought that you just, like they say, like negative thoughts like mushrooms, right? They grow in the dark. Like you feel so bad. You make yourself feel worse. So you're already having a negative thought. Now you're piling guilt and like anger at yourself because how dare I think that? And instead of just saying, oh, I thought that and move on. That's where we need to get to. We need to just start acknowledging our negative thoughts because when instead of feeding them with more negativity.
How do you feel about this tool? How do you feel about naming the little voice inside your head, acknowledging the little voice and then dismissing it? So I decided that my alter ego, the bitch is Monica. You see, so Monica's my alter ego. And when she rears her ugly head, I acknowledge her existence and I tell her that she's not needed in this particular instance and that she may be dismissed.
Mm-hmm. I love it. I love that. And I think an extension of that is a trick where you look at that inner voice, not even as the bitch, but as like the small, afraid child. And whatever works for you, right? Same, no right answer to anything, whatever works. But there is, I do know people who I've coached who find a lot of peace in when they're feeling angry, when they're feeling like all those things, they kind of think of that inner child, and basically just say that like, it's okay. You don't have to go away, but like, it's okay. You don't have to be so scared because it all comes from fear, right? Like if I'm jealous of my friend whose husband got a promotion, that is fear of me feeling like I'm not gonna be able to provide for my family, right? It comes from fear. It doesn't come from, I want the best for everybody. But if I had that thought, it's all fear. So if you can kind of, that inner voice can be a bitch for sure, or it could be maybe like a scared kid.
It's funny that you say that because once upon a time I was trying to help a lady out with her personal marketing. She had been a client, and she was getting certified in neurolinguistic programming, NLP, and some other work, deep work, and she was hypnosis trained. So she hypnotized me and took me back to my 5-year-old self and to release some stuff. And it was very funny what came out of that experience. It was the Monique, little immigrant girl, ringlets and bow on her hair, the whole 9 yards showed up at the door right there.
Because she's that child is always with us. It's our, you call it whatever you want, call it that critter brain, call it like, that base instinct, whatever it is that, it's that child who needs to love and needs to find love and is afraid of a lot of things. We don't lose that child, right? We can try to suppress her, but we don't lose her.
Do you think we should suppress her? Or we should just no, right?
I think when we try to suppress her, I think we should just show her kindness, beating a dead horse possibly, but I think we should just show her kindness. I think to say it's okay. Like it's okay that you feel that way, but you don't have to feel that way.
Dr. Latimer has 3 daughters, very different, all very, very beautiful inside and out. Tell me what you heard a lot from them growing up, and now, give us the ages of these wonderful humans. As they were growing up, what you heard from them that was like, wow.
So if you have more than one child, you'll probably agree with me that family placement is a lot. Maybe it's not everything, but it is a lot. Madeline, my oldest, who is 21, who has done so much in her life, has like gotten so many recognitions for like being a good person and just as a kind person, always feels like she's doing something wrong, right? That first one always is like, Mom, I'm sorry. Like, I needed to help you. I mean, it's the most helpful. She's like, I meant to empty the dishwasher and I didn't do it. And like, I'm like, oh my gosh, you're fine. She's the kid who would call me when she got, or like at lunchtime, they were allowed to have their phones from middle school and say, I'm so sorry I was mean to you this morning.
Aww.
And I am not exaggerating when I say not one time did I ever know what she was talking about. Like she was never mean to me. Like, I don't know what she was talking about, And then, I have Serena, who's 20 and who is a different person. It's just like funny in the life of the party, but much more like stands her ground and is ready. She'll put up a fight, right? Like she's protecting her territory always. And then Lorelai is like that typical third. I'm a third girl. She's a third girl. I get her through and through. Really like wants to please the crowd, but also is looking to like differentiate herself a little bit. So they're all super different, but I would say the common theme in all of them is, and I think it's generational. It's just this overemphasis on when things aren't going well, the way you feel about them not going well, as opposed to just acknowledging that life is like this and saying like, okay, I have a down day, I'm sad today. Being sad does not mean you're depressed, and being stressed does not mean you're anxious. Being sad and being stressed are 2 invaluable parts of the human condition. We need to experience the whole range of humanity. If we didn't, we'd be robots, and it's just okay to feel those things. And the thing I would love to take away from them is this feeling of there's something wrong with them if their feelings aren't happy.
Every day, all the time.
All the time. And a quick little plug, just because this is something Lorelai and I worked on, something called the Helium Project. It was in response to this. It's basically in response to this problem. And, so many well-meaning educators and mental health providers and everything have, recognized that our children are suffering. And they have come up with tons of strategies on how we can prevent suicide, how we can help kids early, how we can, really, help the kids who are suffering, which is wonderful. But we're not doing enough work like further upstream, or farther upstream. I can never get that But we know we're not doing enough, not just preventative to like make them happy, but preventative to say like you're in control of your own life, to empower them, to make them not feel helpless against these emotions, to say like, all right, you're having a bad day. Okay, what can you do about it? Right? There's a story of the two wolves, right? The what is that story? The angry, there's a happy, everyone has two wolves. Everyone has like the happy, joyful wolf, and everyone has the sad wolf. And how do you make sure the happy wolf wins? And the answer is, well, you stop feeding the sad wolf, right? And I feel like we feed into that because all the messaging that they get is these are the warning signs of suicide, these are the signs of depression and anxiety, and we're not doing enough of like, no, 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 that's fine, that's normal. Yeah, we should be there for the kids who are really suffering, but we should also be helping the kids who are not yet really suffering and try to stop them from getting to that point. Or just, it doesn't have to be a full-blown clinical diagnosis, just to make their lives more joyful. You only get to be a child once.
That's right. I do think it's sort of like, sometimes it's a little pandering, whether it's a minority group or it's like you have a bell-shaped curve in the school system as in life. 80% of your kids are going to be sort of like, okay, they're going to have a bad day, but they're not on Adderall, or they're not on, antidepressants or whatever. They're not a mental health statistic. They're just a teenager. Teenagers have bad days. Humans have bad days. Like, you want to almost normalize the fact that you can have a bad day or a bad week or whatever, but you need to have tools to overcome and not let that wolf take over. And I feel like we're focusing on when do you need drugs? When can you prevent the hotline, phone ringing and all this stuff. So it's that 1%, and the 99 is not getting served. So I love the Helium Project, and I'm really saddened by how you told me how difficult it was for the schools to buy into the program, even though it was a turnkey, no cost, no nothing. Like, you handed them a curricula.
Yeah. And I'll say it was just the one so far, it was just the one school. I've had some, and it's just getting going. Anyone who's listening who wants to volunteer and do it, or wants the kids, to like take a look at it. But we're getting out there, we're getting into more schools, and I'm excited about it. And the question I do always get is like, oh, what does it cost? I'm like, no, it doesn't cost anything. This is a labor of love. This is just, I think this information needs to get out there. I want, if we move the needle a tiny bit, but if we keep moving the needle a tiny bit, we'll get there, right? I don't think any of these strategies like, oh, hey, and very quickly, if anyone is listening, it's curricula for schools that kids can actually deliver to their classmates. It's super simple. It's all buttoned up. It's plug and play. And with different campaigns. So there's like a sleep campaign, a time management campaign, a laughter campaign, how important laughter is, but all done in a very non-lecturing, this is how you should go to sleep, you should eat better. It's not like that. It's just information. Like, hey, stomach hurts, head hurts. When's the last time you had a glass of water? Things that are just so simple, but that and the feedback that I've gotten even from teachers is like, you know what, I needed to hear that. It's not anything we don't know. It's stuff that we're not talking about enough because of the negativity kind of goes, it's like what you just said about how too much negativity. It's getting into the DNA. It's just all we do is talk about the crisis, the kids. We've normalized. I mean, the story that I heard early on when I was doing this that kind of inspired me to do it is a middle school guidance counselor met with a bunch of fifth graders just to say like, oh, this is what your sixth grade experience is going to be like, whatever. And there were questions, and a little girl raised her hand and she says, when do we start getting anxious and depressed?
Oh my God.
When do we start getting, I forget, she told me exactly, but it was something that was so, like, when? Not, how do we not do, I mean, even that would have been a sad question, but when?
It's the heliumproject.com, is it not?
It's actually, because everything was taken, right? So it was helium-project.com.
I will put in the URL in the show notes for sure. I think that your labors of love have been vast and wide throughout your existence, and you show up as a volunteer physician for the working poor, for BVMI, which I will also tag here, which I love to death. I think that's an amazing organization. Thank you for doing that. There's a lot of things that I think, to your point, it's this idea that if we do 1%, each one of us does 1% better, then we have, you're moving the needle. It's like the butterflies in South America fluttering, and we're going to feel the effects of that downstream, upstream, across the pond. talk to me a little bit about your new book in September. I'm sure that there is some correlation between the narratives that we talk about in the book, and if not, that's not a big deal. But I'd like to talk about what you're trying to do next to impact.
Yeah. So, as you mentioned before, so I did Take Back the House, which is basically the subtitles How to Raise Happy Parents. And I worked on that with my editor. It's actually her concept, but it developed pretty nicely, I think, into just saying we don't have to run around being stressed and depressed and so overwhelmed and so busy and so everything just because we're parents, but we sort of have bought into that narrative, right? Like you're a better mother if you are, you know, overwhelmed and stressed and, bump into somebody, how are you? Busy. I'm like, okay.
I really hated that answer
I
whenever I got
hate
it.
that answer. Like, but I get why people say it, but also, gosh, what first world problems we have too, right? So, which does not mean that you don't feel overwhelmed and stressed. And I want to validate those feelings for sure. It just mean we got to stop buying into them, right? We have to start taking back the house and saying like, no, this should, our family life, all these years where we're raising our children should be joyful years. We deserve that.
Not only joyful, but also the choices that you make. So you did have multiple children, and you enrolled them in all of the possible activities as opposed to the top two. So you created that monster that now you're complaining to me about. So that I have very little appreciation for that. I'm like, what are you doing? Like the person who's whining to me that they can't keep up and they're super, super stressed, then you unpack it and you realize that those were all choices that they made.
Yes. And I think sometimes even just recognizing that that was a choice sort of takes some of the pressure off. Even if you continue to do it, even just saying like, okay, I chose to do that and it's not necessary. I don't have to do that.
It did, or it didn't work out for me this time, but next time I'm going to do it differently so that I don't have this feeling of like complete overwhelm.
Right. And I'm going to see, I'm going to have some perspective and know that like if they miss the football game, it will be fine. But yes, that was the first book. And then my editor came and said, hey, I have an idea for a second one. So, and I'm going to give her credit for it because imagine somebody comes to you and says like, I want you to write a book on telling parents how they can stop worrying.
Oh, no kidding.
We're working on the order. It went out to focus groups. Probably it's going to be called Worry Less, Parent Better. Because it was just very difficult to find a title that basically I'm like, well, I want to include like worry less, be happier, find more joy, but also your kids will be happier. I want the title to be a paragraph because I'm like, but this is what it's about. So that's what it's about. Definitely challenging because again, just like Take Back, it's to parents of kids of all ages. Like I had a lot of grandparents who actually listened to Take Back and had some really nice feedback about it. Just in the Audible reviews, not people I know, but the worry is, yeah, a funny thing, but it is the thing that is robbing our parenting of probably the most joy, right? If we say we deserve joy, probably the thing that robs it the most for people who can feed their children and pay the rent and shelter and do the basics. I think then the worry is the thing that will,
So how to tie this in? Because this I think ties so nicely into the narrative conversations.
So, you talk about the internal and external narrative, and then I mean, I don't know how you feel about it, right? But for me, it's almost like there are 4 scenarios and only one of them is productive and helps you in your life. One is the internal and external narrative match, but they're not true to you. They're not authentic, but you've made them match, right? You've bought in hard on what you're supposed to be and you've kind of created your life to match that external narrative. And now, you think about the little girl who's always told, all her worth comes from being cute, being pretty, right? She grows up like that. That's the external narrative. And now what does she believe about herself? That her value. So she has a pimple and she wants to, not go to school that day. So then you have the cases where you believe you can be better, right? You believe you can be better, but you let that external narrative come in and tell you that you're not good enough. And then you have the situation where everything in your external narrative, every piece of evidence, right? And I will say this to patients sometimes. I'm like, well, what is your evidence that that's going to happen? But they won't have any, but then the internal narrative will be so strong, right? So, but then you have the last case where you get that internal and external narrative to match. And that's where you find your peace, right? Like that's where everything comes together for you. And the way that works in parenting, the way it works in the book, and I haven't given this enough thought, but as we're talking, I can picture this, right? that we as a culture stop telling everybody, in order to be a good parent, your child has to go to Harvard, your child has to excel, not only at academics, they have to excel at sports, and they have to be, great volunteers. And I mean, they don't know how to tie their shoes or do their laundry, but they have to be great at all these other things. We stop that, right? We start saying that the person's worth comes from the person that they are, and raise a good kid. And honestly, even if you don't, try to raise a good kid. And if you don't raise a good kid, it's still not your fault. Like, just do the best you can. But let's focus on the things that really matter. Because I know that if you talk to anyone, that is what really matters to them. You say to any parent, what do you want for your child? It's going to be like, I want them to be happy. I want them to find love. I want them to be productive and be a useful member of society. They say all the right things. But then we bombard them with like our bumper stickers and our bullshit and, like all the things like, so we want to, I don't know, like pound our chest for how our kids turned out. Like, you give birth to a human being, right? We're not, what is it, an octopus that can like cut off a limb and grow another one? That's not what happens here. They have their own soul and their own passions and their own everything. So the way we get that to align and find the real joy is to like stop letting the external narrative control what we think we should be as parents. And then we parent the child in front of us. And we just acknowledge that nobody could love that child more than we love that child, that a parent's love is insane. And we acknowledge that that alone means we're doing a good job, and we start like kind of aligning those narratives. And then I think you have this, you can find at least moments of the day where you find true peace. I'm doing a good job. I even hate to use the word job, from Take Back. I hate saying motherhood is a job. But you're doing what you need to do, and you're doing it well, and your child knows they are loved, and that sometimes it's got to be enough, because no one knows what tomorrow is going to hold. So we can make ourselves absolutely crazy worrying about what's about to come, but as well as I do, the rug gets pulled out from under you about the things that you never thought you'd worry about, and 99% of the things that you worry about never happen. So we're really just wasting our time. But I think we could find that peace if we stop listening, if we can, just listen to just the, filter out some of this noise. This noise in our culture is just deafening.
I think somebody recently said, this is a friend of a friend, don't pay the toll twice. So she went to the doctor, and they told her that they might be seeing something in her breast, and maybe they need to do a biopsy. And she immediately went to the worst place and started stressing about it. And her mother's advice was, don't pay the toll twice. Don't worry before you need to worry. Maybe there's absolutely nothing to worry about, so why would you start worrying about it now? Only to not have to worry about it, or to then potentially, when you need to worry about it, you worry about it. But there's nothing you can do to change what is. So why are you paying the toll twice is kind of the premise of the thing. And I think your point about the noise is a big one. I think that's a huge new age problem.
Definitely.
Don't you have choice about the noise that you listen to?
I mean, you do, but it's hard, right? It's a challenge. There's just so much information coming at us all the time. It's hard to filter through it. It's hard to know what's important. It's, we get lost in it. So yeah, really challenging. Do you have a choice? Sure. But in the real world, I would say your better superpower there is to recognize what is actual noise and what is actually useful. Like, maybe you can't shut it off, but that doesn't mean you have to listen to it.
Ooh, repeat that. Masterclass.
Yeah. I mean, you can't shut it off, but you definitely can decide what's worth listening to.
You also said something way back when, I think it might have been, it was after Take Back the House. You said something about, you're the best mother for that child. No one's going to love that child more than its mother, his or her mother, their mother.
With a very rare exception, and if we're just talking about mothers, and we can extend it to dads as well, but with a very rare exception for mothers especially, you would jump in front of a train for that child. You would do anything for that child. You need to go with your gut because you're parenting that child. When you start listening to the noise now, well, whose child are you parenting? No one knows that child. Like, you do. Your heartbeat was the first thing that child heard. And we used to have these maternal societies that really functioned. The mothers were happy and the grandmothers were happy, and everybody, everyone just loved those children. We just expect so much of ourselves now. And by extension, we expect so much of our children. And I know, and I hear it all the time, and I've said it, like, it's not me. I don't know why she puts so much pressure on herself. Well, I think we need to be honest with ourselves about that as well.
Maybe we set the bar a little high, huh?
And I think maybe we have to like align our behaviors with our words, right? So you can say to you blue in the face to a child, we don't care. We love you anyway. We love you anyway. We love you anyway. But does your reaction at a game, or does your reaction to a test, or does your concern about, or getting them a tutor even though they have a B, and like, does all of that align? Or is it just because they'll believe what you do more than they'll believe what you say always?
Isn't that a theme that I love to talk about?
It's just a fact. And it kind of stings because it's so much easier to say it.
It was much easier for my dad to tell me not to smoke as he was chain smoking his cigarettes,
Or even to say things like, don't stress, don't be worried. But yet we're like losing sleep all the time. We're so stressed and so worried. And that just like comes off of comes out of our pores sometimes, that anxiety. I have hope. I think we, as, there's so much good, right? There's so much positivity. I love our relationships with our children. I think the way we parent in that way is so great. I think this is more casual. I don't want my children to be my friends by any stretch. They have plenty of friends. They have one mother, but I do want a relationship where we're close and we're not, but there's good and bad to that for sure.
I can't tell you how many more times I want to have you on this podcast because there's so much to unpack.
I know we that was a lot of breath, right? We didn't dive in too deep on anything, but all of these things, and it's just fun to think about, like you don't have to be great, you don't have to be perfect, you don't have to take in everything, but just give these like ideas some thought. I would say to everybody, just let it sit with you, not necessarily what we said today, but just like anything that resonates with you, give that the space, as opposed to the things that you think you should be doing.
So there's so much to the takeaways here were vast and wide, and I so appreciate your time today. And Karen was kind enough to call me from the beach, so that is a big, big sacrifice. Thank you for that as well. On a holiday weekend, no less. So the idea, so Helium Project, something to check out. BVMI, I'll put in the notes. Take Back the House, definitely. Worry Less, Parent Better. I love that title, by the way.
You do? Okay.
Oh, I do.
Good.
And Listum is her app. And by the way, that name gets Monique's branding blessing all over it.
If anyone's listening, how happy that makes me, because if you okay it.
When I saw that, I was like, damn, she didn't even ask me. And that's like brilliant. Like, what? How do people come up with great branding ideas without me? No, I'm kidding. I'm joking.
And the truth is, so many things are taken that, you're limited a little bit.
Yeah. So it's list-m and it's brilliantly done.
And listum.app if you want to check out the website. But you can, by the time this releases, you'll be able to download it on the App Store.
Super, super duper. So as you can see, Karen does not let the grass grow under her feet, and mother of 5, physician, master of everything, and knows how to apparently develop apps. So there's that. And we have all these to unpack. And I think the point about the narratives is they are intertwined, and we have agency and we have choice in some of the things that we take on, or those that we decide to take the little 5-year-old, thank them and love them and cuddle them and say, it's okay, you're safe now, and dismiss the behaviors that we find ourselves exhibiting. So that was a takeaway too. I think the idea of you're not stuck with anything is something I talk about a lot in the book. So you had the benefit of a beautiful, loving childhood, and that allowed you to step into something that you didn't even understand was so great, which was great because maybe you wouldn't have, as you said, stepped through that door if you had known how difficult that door really, really was. We grew up in a time where we didn't have the guidance that we give our children. And sometimes I wonder if that's good or bad.
And sometimes I don't even wonder. I just know the answer. Not in every case.
Yeah, I'm very against helicoptering and snow plowing. And sometimes it's unintentional. I get that. When it's intentional, it makes me a little crazy. But because ultimately we all want to raise ourselves and our children in a manner that allows them to do the best when we're not there.
Right. I think that's the key to keep in mind, that you're not raising this child to live in your house forever. You're actually raising them to be successful in the real world.
and go in peace and enjoy. So, and so ladies that are listening to this, because that is, well, that I think that is our primary audience, is Karen's given us a lot of food for thought and a lot of tips and tricks on, the mirroring exercise was definitely a master class, which I think we're going to have to do a workshop on.
Yeah, yeah. Do that. Next time you're feeling really bad about yourself, take a minute. And if you are a journaler, write it down. Even if you're not, write it down. Just write yourself a letter. But first you write the letter to yourself about how horrible you are and how guilty you feel and how you should have done something differently and all that. You write that letter, you put it aside, and then you take it out an hour later, but you look at it through the lens of that is a friend who wrote you that letter. And then you write back.
Well, I don't know about you, but I just felt like I got 10 years of therapy in so that was effective. Holy. So guys, I think I'm going to leave some contact information for Dr. Latimer, Karen, however you want to refer to her, depending on who you are. And for this topic, which is always a good one especially for women who do a lot and wear a lot of hats. And if you have any questions, reach out to us. You can find, I don't know how else to wrap it up. You've got it.
Be kind. To yourself. Be kind to yourself.
I think those are words of wisdom. Thank you all. Really appreciate you being here. See you next time. Thank you so much for listening to Possibilities with Monique DeMeo, where we unpack life as a female mover and shaker. If you like the show, please consider liking it, or better still, subscribing to it and leaving us a rating. It truly does help. Also, you can pick up my book, The 7 Secrets to Creating a Life You Love, a practical guide for women in leadership, which is coming out in September 2023. You can find the book, other episodes of this podcast, and how to stay in touch at moniquedemeo.com. DEMAIO. I look forward to seeing you again soon. With gratitude, Monique.